The 28-point peace plan arrived without ceremony. No grand summit, no midnight conference calls between foreign ministers, no carefully orchestrated photo opportunities in neutral capitals. It simply appeared, simultaneously acknowledged in Washington, Moscow, and Kyiv within hours of each other. And that simultaneity told you everything. Because in diplomacy, timing is never accidental. Coordination always reveals intention. What unnerved European capitals wasn't the document itself. Peace proposals have circulated throughout this war. What unnerved them was the choreography. 3 capitals speaking in unison, yet nobody claiming the script. In Brussels, Berlin, and Paris, the assessment came quickly. This wasn't a negotiating framework. It was a fait accompli seeking retroactive legitimacy. And the strategic tilt was unmistakable. Russia consolidates territorial gains, Ukraine absorbs strategic losses, and somewhere in the middle, this gets called peace.
I mean, of course, Europe wants peace, Ukraine wants peace, but for any peace to be sustainable, it has to have certain elements. If you just give in to the aggression, then you invite for more aggression. And this is dangerous not only for us in Europe, but also our Indo-Pacific partners, because all those countries around that might have an appetite for their neighbors' territories will learn that this is okay. It pays off. And this is a very dangerous moment for all.
Europe's response came with unusual velocity, not the usual diplomatic hedging or carefully passed statements designed to offend no one. This was sharper, more direct. Even Eastern European states, countries that typically defer to Washington on security architecture, began voicing concerns publicly. NATO's response was telling. Senior officials didn't attack the substance directly.
I think it is important to say that one of the elements in the 28-point plan is the security guarantee from the US, an Article 5 guarantee. That's about the strongest guarantee that can be put forward. And so that fortifies in me the belief that what we're all trying to achieve here is a just and lasting peace, but it'll only be just and lasting if there are security guarantees and if we bear in mind that matters for Ukraine are always to be determined by Ukraine.
They questioned the process, the consultation, the alliance structures that were supposedly bypassed. Because what this document represented was more dangerous than its specific terms. It suggested Washington might be redefining its commitments without alliance consensus.
First, borders cannot be changed by force. Second, as a sovereign nation, there cannot be limitations on Ukraine's armed forces that would leave the country vulnerable to future attack and thereby also undermining European security. Third, the centrality of the European Union in securing peace for Ukraine must be fully reflected. Ukraine must have the freedom and sovereign right to choose its own destiny. They have chosen a European destiny.
For Ukraine, the reaction went beyond policy disagreement. It bordered on betrayal. Senior officials in Kyiv described the document as fundamentally undermining 3 years of battlefield sacrifice. Not because compromise is unthinkable, but because the terms appeared to reward aggression and penalize resistance.
This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. Currently, the pressure on Ukraine is one of the hardest. Ukraine may now face a very difficult choice, either losing its dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. Either 28 difficult points or an extremely difficult winter, the most difficult one yet, and further risks. Life without freedom, without dignity, without justice. And we are expected to trust someone who has already attacked us twice.
Moscow's response followed a pattern anyone who's watched Russian diplomacy recognizes immediately. First, deny receipt. Create procedural distance. Let others debate a document you haven't officially acknowledged exists. Then, once the speculation reaches critical mass, confirm selectively. Putin himself acknowledged proposals under review, language calibrated to suggest Moscow holds the decision-making power.
We have this text. We received it through existing channels of communication with the U.S. administration. I believe it could, too, form the basis for a final peace settlement. But this text is not being discussed with us in any substantive way, and I can assume why. I believe the reason is the same. The U.S. administration has so far been unable to secure the consent of the Ukrainian side. Ukraine is against it.
Notice what Russia didn't do. It didn't rush to endorse. It didn't declare victory. It didn't overplay its hand. Because Moscow understands that in negotiations, desperation is weakness. And right now, Russia wants to project that it's negotiating from strength, not need. The message was clear. Russia sets the pace. Russia defines acceptability. And Russia will walk away if the terms don't serve its long-term strategic interests. This is patient power politics.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite.
Then came the American contradiction. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, America's chief diplomat, told senators in closed session that the 28-point document was fundamentally a Russian proposal, that Washington was essentially serving as a transmission mechanism. Hours later, his public statement said the opposite. This was an American framework developed through consultations with Russian input as one component among many. Now, in diplomacy, mixed messages are sometimes tactical. But this wasn't strategic ambiguity. This was narrative collapse. Because when your Secretary of State can't maintain a consistent position for 24 hours, you're not projecting complexity. You're projecting confusion. And in a negotiation of this magnitude, where every word is passed by capitals across 3 continents, consistency isn't a nicety. It's currency. Rubio's reversal did something worse than weaken America's position. It validated Europe's deepest fear, that Washington was no longer driving this process, merely facilitating it.
What's the plan for tomorrow? Would only make sense if it includes a provision that says the Americans are willing to provide a security guarantee similar to Article 5 of NATO. Are you receptive to this?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to discuss the details of what's being, worked on with regards to any particular provisions. Clearly, I think we all recognize that part of getting a final end to this war will require for Ukraine to feel as it is safe and it is never going to be invaded or attacked again.
Donald Trump then removed any remaining ambiguity about America's position. After weeks of White House meetings with Zelensky, handshakes, photo ops, public declarations of support, Trump delivered a message that cut through the diplomatic niceties. Take this deal or fight alone.
No, not my.
Sir, do you still play? Sir, do you still play?
I would like to get the peace. It should have happened a long time ago. The Ukraine war with Russia should have never happened. If I were president, it never would have happened. We're trying to get it ended. One way or the other, we have to get it ended. So. Then he can continue. Then he can continue to fight his little heart out.
It wasn't framed as abandonment. Trump's team called it strategic realism, a recognition of limits, an acknowledgement that American support, while substantial, was never intended to be infinite. But framing matters less than substance. And what European allies heard, what Kyiv certainly heard, was a superpower announcing the terms of its disengagement. Not withdrawal from the conflict entirely, but withdrawal from unconditional support. Trump wasn't positioning America as Ukraine's advocate anymore. He was positioning America as Ukraine's judge, deciding what was achievable, what was reasonable, and what would no longer receive Washington's backing. That's not alliance management, that's ultimatum delivery. Which brings us to the question Western analysts are now asking quietly, and some loudly, whose peace plan is this really? Because if you strip away the diplomatic language and trace the substantive terms, this document looks less like an American proposal and more like Russian demands translated into negotiable English. So we have to ask the harder question: was the delay in serious negotiations always part of the design? Think about the timeline. 3 years of conflict, repeated European calls for negotiation, periodic Russian signals of willingness to talk, and yet no serious diplomatic framework until now. Was Ukraine kept in the fight, supported, armed, rhetorically championed, while the actual endgame was being shaped elsewhere? Were European allies deliberately kept at arm's length, brought into the conversation only when the architecture was too advanced to dismantle? If this document truly originated in Moscow, then Russia has achieved something remarkable. It's gotten Washington to deliver its own demands on America's behalf. If this document is genuinely American in origin, then Washington has fundamentally redefined what it considers an acceptable outcome without preparing its allies or its partner in Kyiv. Either scenario represents a diplomatic earthquake. Russia's approach this time is notably different from previous negotiations. Minsk collapsed because the language was ambiguous. Istanbul fell apart because the terms were reversible. Both agreements allowed room for reinterpretation, for tactical delays, for parties to claim compliance, while preparing for renewed conflict. Moscow appears determined not to repeat those mistakes. Reports suggest the Kremlin is insisting on ironclad language, territorial arrangements that can't be walked back, security guarantees that lock in geopolitical realities, clauses that foreclose future disputes. No poetic phrasing, no diplomatic flexibility, no face-saving ambiguity. Because Russia doesn't want a frozen conflict this time. It doesn't want a temporary ceasefire that allows Ukraine to rearm and the West to reset. It wants a terminal agreement, a final configuration, and that means language that eliminates maneuver room for all parties. What we're witnessing, then, isn't simply a peace negotiation. It's a contest over historical authorship. Will the record show that Ukraine accepted an imperfect peace to prevent national exhaustion? That pragmatism, however painful, prevailed over prolonged suffering? Or will history record that Russia converted battlefield pressure into diplomatic dominance? That the West, fatigued and fractured, ultimately ratified conquest? Because peace now appears achievable, but only under one framework, only on one power's terms. And the cost of that peace is that Ukraine's future will be written, but not by Ukraine. That's not diplomacy, that's dictation.